The rain slammed the docks like fists, and Officer Marcus Delaney felt his partner freeze against his leg before he heard her whine. Piper never whined. Not in 2 years, not in 1,000 shifts. She sat, rose, sat again in front of a rust-red container, and pressed her nose to the seam like she was listening to something no human could hear. Marcus reached for his radio. His hand was already shaking. Before we open that door, tell me in the comments what part of the world you're watching from, and hit subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. The port of Baltimore never really slept, but between 4 and 5 in the morning, it came the closest it ever came. And that was the hour Marcus liked best. The big cranes stood still against the grey sky, the trucks lined up in loose rows waiting for the shift change, and the only sounds were the rain, the wind off the water, and the low hum of the sodium lamps overhead. He had walked this same row of containers on this same shift for almost 2 years, and in all that time, Piper had never once done what she was doing now. She was a 4-year-old Belgian Malinois, all copper and black, 90% muscle, and 10% stubborn heart, and Marcus had trained her from the day she came out of the kennel at 14 weeks old. She was smart, she was fast, and she was so obedient it sometimes embarrassed the other handlers, because when you told Piper to sit, Piper sat like a soldier at attention, and she stayed sat until you released her, even if a squirrel ran 3 feet in front of her nose. Everyone at the K9 unit liked to say Piper had 2 settings, on and off, but that morning, standing in front of container number 418 in row 17, she found a 3rd setting nobody had ever seen. She was trembling, not from the cold, because Piper had been raised in weather worse than a Baltimore November, not from fear, because Marcus had watched her walk into abandoned warehouses full of raccoons and broken glass and never flinch. It was something that came up from inside her, and it made her whine again, low and small, in a way that hurt to hear. Her tail was tucked, her ears were flat, and she would not, could not, stop staring at that seam. "Piper," Marcus said quietly, show me what you got." She looked up at him for one heartbeat, and in that heartbeat he saw something he had never seen in a working dog's eyes before, and he never forgot it as long as he lived. Then she pressed her nose to the seam again, and this time she scratched the door once with her paw, very gently, like she was asking permission. Marcus keyed his radio. His voice came out steadier than he felt. "Central, this is K96. I need a supervisor and customs down here at row 17, container 418. I got a hard alert from Piper. Something's inside." Central asked what kind of alert. Marcus stared at the rust-red door, at the water running down the ribbed steel, at his dog trembling in front of it, and he could not think of a single word in the manual that described what he was seeing. "Something's inside," he repeated. "Get down here." While he waited, he did what he was trained to do. He backed off 10 paces. He made a mental note of the container's markings. The paint was faded and streaked with salt. Somebody had stenciled a code in white block letters, worn thin at the edges. He recognized the prefix as one that came out of a mid-sized port on the far side of the Pacific, routed through Long Beach and then east on rail. Except this one had come in by ship, straight to Baltimore, which was unusual by itself. Cargo that took the long water route from that part of the world almost never bypassed the West Coast, not unless somebody wanted it to skip a set of eyes. The seal was intact. He checked it with his flashlight from a distance. That was the thing that stopped him first, before anything else. The seal was intact, and the door was closed, and yet Piper, who had gone through a certification test where they hid an ounce of narcotics behind 16 inches of coffee grounds and axle grease, and she still hit on it, was telling him with every muscle in her body that inside that closed and sealed container there was something she did not have a training reward for. 20 minutes later, headlights swept across the wet asphalt, and Sergeant Rachel Bishop stepped out of the unmarked SUV with her raincoat pulled tight and her jaw set the way she set it when her weekend was about to disappear. Behind her came the customs shift supervisor, Danny Kowalski, a heavy, grey-haired man in his early 60s who had opened, by his own count, more than 10,000 containers in his lifetime, and who had made it very clear over the years that he hated surprises more than he hated the weather. "Marcus," Rachel said, "tell me what I'm looking at." Piper alerted hard. She's still holding on it. Rachel looked at Piper. Piper was sitting again now, absolutely still, water beading on her muzzle, eyes locked on the door. She's been like that this whole time. For 22 minutes. Danny walked up to the door with the manifest in his hand, and he flipped through the pages with the practiced impatience of a man who had done this in his sleep. He got to the third page, stopped, went back to the first, then back to the third. "That's not right," he said. "What's not right?" "The seal number on the door doesn't match the seal number on the transfer log from the last port. It's close, 2 digits off, but it's not right." He shone his flashlight on the metal tag hanging from the locking bar. "And the paperwork here says auto parts, out of a warehouse called Willow Bend Distribution, up on the Eastern Shore. But this manifest was updated 3 times in transit. Once in the origin port, that's normal. Once in Singapore, that's a little weird. And once here at receiving, which is not weird by itself, except the update was entered from a workstation nobody was signed into last night." Rachel's jaw tightened another half-inch. "Danny," she said, "what would you say the odds are that this is auto parts?" Danny looked at Piper. Piper had not blinked in what seemed like an hour. "I'd say," Danny said slowly, "that in 38 years I've never seen a dog behave like that around auto parts." Rachel keyed her own radio. "I want a medic bus staged on Warehouse Avenue, out of sight from the container yard, and I want 2 more units on standby. Silent approach, no lights." Marcus felt Piper lean against his shin. She was still trembling. The rain kept falling. They cut the seal at 6 minutes past 4 in the morning. Danny did it himself with a pair of long-handled cutters, and the sound of the seal snapping in the wet air made Marcus's stomach turn over. Rachel had her hand on her sidearm, but not drawn. 2 uniformed officers stood at flanking angles. Marcus took Piper by the collar and gently drew her back 3 paces, because whatever was inside, he did not want it to be the first thing she saw close up. She resisted him. Actually resisted him. That was a first, too. The doors were double-hinged. Danny worked the locking bar, and the whole assembly groaned like something waking up from a long sleep, and then he pulled the right door open, and the smell came out of the container before the light from Rachel's flashlight even reached the inside. It was a smell Marcus knew, because every officer who had ever worked a bad domestic call or found a car abandoned in July with the windows up knew it. It was the smell of human beings who had been in a small space for too long without water or air. It was sour and warm and unmistakable, and it hit him in the chest, and for a second he could not move. Rachel's flashlight beam swept across a wall of cardboard boxes, stacked from floor to ceiling at the front of the container, all labeled with the Auto Parts logo. It looked, for one lying second, like a normal load. Then the beam caught the seam, where the cardboard wall did not quite meet the roof, and Marcus saw a flash of something pale, and a hand, holding onto the top of one of the boxes. "Oh, God," Rachel whispered. Danny stepped forward without hesitation and took the top boxes down, and behind them was a hollow, and behind the hollow, packed together in the freezing dark, were people. Marcus counted them later, when he could count anything again. 23 young women, none of them older than 25 as far as anyone could tell, and 2 children, one a boy of maybe 9 and one a girl who looked 7. They were huddled together in blankets that were not warm enough for anything, and they were so quiet that at first Marcus thought some of them were not alive. Then, the little girl in the front, the one with the biggest eyes, saw Piper Marcus was still holding Piper by the collar. He was going to hand her off to a second officer and go help pull the boxes down. But before he could do any of that, the little girl reached out one thin arm from under her blanket, and she did something that stopped everyone in the container yard. She whispered something, just one word. Nobody there understood the language, but everyone there understood the tone. She was asking if it was safe. Piper, who had been trained since puppyhood never to leave her handler's side without a command, pulled slowly and steadily out of Marcus's grip. He let her go. He did not know why. He just did. She walked forward, one paw at a time, into the container, past Rachel, past Danny, past the women who did not dare move, and she went right up to that little girl, and she lay down on the freezing steel floor with her head across the girl's knees, and she did not move. Marcus went down on his knees right where he stood. He did not remember doing it. Rachel had a hand over her mouth. Danny Kowalski, who had opened 10,000 containers and hated surprises, turned his face away from the light so nobody would see it. The paramedics arrived a few minutes later. So did more officers, and then federal agents, and then people from 3 different agencies whose jackets Marcus barely registered. The women were carried out one by one, wrapped in dry blankets, given water in small, careful sips. Some of them cried, most of them did not, and that was somehow worse. The little boy was named Kai, according to a tag pinned inside his coat, and he refused to let go of one of the older women, who turned out not to be his mother, but a woman who had held him for the 11 days they had been inside the container. The little girl, the one Piper had gone to, did not have a tag. She did not speak. She held onto Piper's neck rough, and when Marcus finally reached in to help lift her out, she flinched, and Piper made a sound in her throat that Marcus had never heard from her before, low and warning, aimed not at the girl, but at everyone else in the world. "It's okay, Pipes," Marcus said, his own voice cracked. "It's okay, baby. We're taking her somewhere safe." Piper stood. She would not leave the girl's side. So Marcus, on the advice of nobody in particular, told the paramedics they would ride together, and the girl and the dog and Marcus climbed into the back of the ambulance, and Piper lay across the girl's feet the whole way to the hospital. At the hospital, they were led into a private room in the pediatric wing, because a police social worker named Angela Foster had come the moment she was called. And Angela knew things about children who had been through things nobody should go through. Angela was in her 50s, small and quiet and unshakable, and she took one look at the little girl and the dog and Marcus and said, "Whatever it takes to keep them together, that's what we do." Doctors came in. Nurses came in. Everyone kept their voices low. The girl had bruises on her ankles from being tied at some point in the past, and she was severely dehydrated, and she was underweight for a 7-year-old, and she had a fever that they brought down slowly with fluids. She did not scream when the needle went in for the IV. She did not make any sound at all. She just kept her hand on Piper's shoulder. Marcus stepped out into the hallway when they told him he could, because Piper was sound asleep at last, curled against the girl's side, and because he needed to be alone for 1 minute. He got as far as the vending machine at the end of the hallway before his knees went out, and he sat down on the floor with his back against the wall, and he put his face in his hands and cried the way grown men do when they are pretty sure nobody is watching, silently, with their shoulders shaking. Rachel found him there. She sat down next to him on the floor in her wet raincoat, and she did not say anything for a long time. Then she said, "You know this is going to be a big one." "How big?" Marcus asked. "We think it's been going on for at least 3 years, maybe longer. There's a pattern in the port logs that nobody caught, and Danny is already pulling the last 36 months of manifests. This wasn't the first container. This was just the first one Piper hit." Marcus wiped his face with the sleeve of his uniform. "Why didn't the other dogs catch it?" Rachel was quiet a moment. "I don't know. Maybe the wind. Maybe they weren't close enough. Maybe those containers went out on trucks before the sweeps. Maybe Piper's the first one who ever got the exact scent under the exact conditions. She looked down the hallway toward the room where the little girl and the dog were sleeping. Or maybe Piper's just Piper. They sat there in silence for another minute. "Rachel," Marcus said, "that little girl. I know. She doesn't have a name. They'll figure out her name. There are people whose whole job is to figure out things like that. She'll have a name, Marcus. Give it time." Marcus nodded. He thought about the way Piper had walked into that container. He thought about the sound Piper had made, that low warning growl at the world when the girl had flinched. He thought about how a dog who had never disobeyed a command in her life had disobeyed him for the first time to lie down beside a child. "I'm not leaving her," he said. "The girl, either of them." Rachel looked at him for a moment, and then she reached over and squeezed his shoulder once and stood up. "Then don't," she said, "but you're going to have to help me catch the rest of them. There's more of this out there. Piper told you there was. Now we have to prove it." Over the next 36 hours, the story went where stories like that go. It made the local news first, then the network affiliates, then a wire story that spread across the country by breakfast time. The department did not release Piper's name, but a reporter with a good scanner and a good source figured out the outline. And by Tuesday morning, half of Baltimore was talking about the K9 dog at the port who had found the missing women. Marcus turned down every interview. He did not sleep more than 4 hours at a stretch. He drove between the hospital and the department and his own apartment, and Piper rode in the back of his cruiser the way she always did, alert but calm, ears up, watching the world. Except now Marcus could see the difference in her. She was checking on him. She kept turning her head to look at him over and over, as if to make sure he was still there. The little girl at the hospital did not speak for 3 days. Then on the 4th day, when Angela Foster brought her a stuffed bear and a plate of yogurt with strawberries on top, she said one word in English, very quietly. She pointed at the door and said, "Piper." Marcus, who had just walked in with the dog, felt his eyes sting for the 10th time that week. Angela crouched down. "Do you want to see her?" The girl nodded. "Do you want to tell me your name?" The girl held out her hand toward Piper, and Piper came and put her head under it. "Mia," the girl said, very softly, very carefully, like a name she had not been allowed to say out loud for a long time. "Mia," Angela repeated. "That is a beautiful name. Do you have another name too?" Mia shook her head. "Just Mia." Marcus made a note on his phone. Mia. Just Mia. He did not know then how much of the rest of his year was going to be spent trying to find out where that name had come from and where the rest of it had gone. The federal agents assigned to the case were led by a woman named Special Agent Karen Whitlock, who worked out of the FBI's Baltimore field office and who had spent 12 years on human trafficking cases. She was tall and lean and quiet, and she said please and thank you to the desk sergeant, and she asked to be shown the container yard herself before she asked to see anything else. She and Marcus stood in front of container 418 on a bright cold morning, 3 days after the discovery, and she took her time. "Your dog whined," she said. "That's what your report said." "Yes, ma'am." "Not barked, not alerted with a sit. She whined first." "Yes, ma'am." Whitlock looked at Piper, who was sitting on the wet asphalt at Marcus's heel. "I've been doing this a long time, Officer Delaney," she said. "I've worked with a lot of dogs. I have never once, not in my whole career, heard of a canine whining on a human find. Never." "Yeah," Marcus said. "Me neither." "Do you know why she did?" Marcus thought about it. He thought about it the way he had been thinking about it for 3 days, turning it over in his head at night when he could not sleep. He thought about the way Piper had looked up at him for that one heartbeat, and about the sound that had come out of her, and about the way she had walked into that container against every command she had ever been trained to obey. "I think," he said slowly, "she was telling me they were alive." Whitlock looked at him for a long time. "That's what I think too," she said. She and her team worked out of a conference room at the Port Authority building for the next 2 weeks. Danny Kowalski moved his desk in there, so did 2 customs analysts, a data specialist from the state police, and a young agent named Tobias Reed, who did nothing but stare at spreadsheets for 14 hours a day. They pulled every manifest from Willow Bend Distribution going back 4 years. They pulled the shipping records of the parent company. They pulled the payroll of the trucking outfit that had been scheduled to move container 418 out of the yard, a small firm out of Middle River that turned out to be owned on paper by a man who did not exist. And they found the pattern. There had been at least 11 containers, over 3 years, moved through the Port of Baltimore under the Willow Bend paperwork. Every single one of them had been offloaded on a night when the same customs officer was on his lunch break, and every single one of them had been picked up by a truck whose driver had shown a different set of credentials each time. Nobody had ever noticed, because nobody had ever looked at 11 containers spread across 3 years the way Tobias Reed looked at them now, with red string on a corkboard and 30 cups of bad coffee. They also found something worse. Every single one of those 11 containers had originated in the same coastal town on the far side of the Pacific. Every single one of them had been moved by the same small feeder ship. And every single one of them had been checked in at Baltimore by a supervisor whose signature had been forged so well that even Danny, who had known the man for 20 years, thought it was real. The supervisor whose signature had been forged was Danny Kowalski. He found out on a Thursday when Whitlock sat him down in the conference room and slid the 11 manifests across the table to him and asked him gently if he had signed any of them. Danny went white. He looked at his own signature at the bottom of each page. He looked up at Whitlock. He said, "I never signed those. I have not signed a receiving manifest in 6 years. I have not had the authority to sign a receiving manifest since I got promoted." Whitlock said she believed him. She said she had already checked the electronic records and confirmed that his signature had been scanned in and reused. She said she was telling him because he deserved to know that somebody had been using his name to make 11 shipments of human beings look like auto parts, and that if the case had cracked open a different way, he might have been the one in a cell right now. Danny stared at the papers for a long time. Then he said very quietly, "Who did it?" "That," Whitlock said, "is what we're going to find out." While the investigation ran, Mia stayed at a specialized shelter for child victims outside the city, a low brick building with a garden and a fence and a staff of people who knew what they were doing. Angela Foster visited every day. Marcus visited every day too, on his way home from shift, and every time he came, he brought Piper. And every time he brought Piper, Mia lit up in a way that she did not light up for anything else. She laughed once on the 10th day when Piper rolled onto her back for a belly rub and made her ridiculous happy dog groan. It was the first time anyone at the shelter had heard her laugh. The staff wrote it down. Mia started talking a little more each week. Her English was broken, but coming in fast, because children's brains are the miracles they are, and because the shelter had a bilingual tutor who worked with her every morning. She could say Piper, she could say Marcus, she could say water and cookie and thank you and the word she used most, which was please. She would say please when she wanted Piper to come sit next to her. She would say please when she wanted the light left on at night. She would say please when Marcus had to leave, and she wanted him to promise he would come back. He always promised. He always came back. On the 17th day, Mia showed him something she had not shown anyone else. She was sitting on the floor of the shelter's playroom with Piper stretched out beside her, and Marcus was on the low couch reading through a stack of paperwork Whitlock had asked him to review. Mia reached up under the collar of her t-shirt and drew out a thin silver chain that she had worn around her neck the entire time, and on the chain was a small oval locket. It was scratched and tarnished, and one of the hinges was bent, but the clasp still worked. She opened it. Inside was a photograph cut down to fit the tiny oval. It was a woman's face, a young woman with dark hair pulled back and a soft, tired smile, standing in front of a doorway with sunlight behind her. Marcus recognized nothing about the doorway. He recognized nothing about the location, but he recognized in the shape of the eyes and the line of the jaw something he had seen every day for the past 17 days. "Mia," he said gently, "is this your mama?" Mia nodded. "Do you know where she is?" Mia did not answer for a long moment. Then she pointed very slowly at the floor. Marcus did not understand. Mia saw that he did not understand, and she reached over and put her small hand flat on the floor and pressed down hard. "Down," she said. "Down there." Marcus felt something cold slide into his stomach. "On a boat," he said. "In a container, like the one you were in." Mia shook her head. She pointed at the floor again. She pointed at the walls. She made a small circle with her hands, closed in, hollow. "A room," Marcus said. "Underground, somewhere with walls." Mia looked at him with eyes that were too old for her, and she nodded. Marcus called Whitlock from the parking lot. He told her. Whitlock was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Bring the locket in. Do not scan the photo. Do not email it. Bring it in physically. Today." He brought it in. Whitlock's analysts worked on the photograph for a day and a half. They cleaned it, they sharpened it, they ran facial recognition against every database they had access to. They got no hit. But they did get, from the doorway in the background of the photo, a match. It was a specific style of tile that had been imported for exactly one construction project in the state of Maryland in the last decade. The tile had been used in a boutique hotel on the Eastern Shore that had gone bankrupt 2 years ago and had sat empty ever since. The hotel had a basement, a large one, that had once been meant as a spa. The hotel was owned through 3 shell companies by a man Marcus had never heard of before that afternoon. His name was Douglas Ainsworth. He was 58 years old, a lifelong resident of a small town outside Baltimore, and he was the vice chairman of the Maryland Port Authority's Community Development Advisory Board. He had been photographed the previous spring at a charity gala shaking hands with the governor. He had, according to the FBI's records, no criminal history of any kind. Whitlock stared at the file. Danny Kowalski stared at the file. Tobias Reed said the words that everyone was thinking. "That's the guy," he said. "That's the guy whose office sits 3 doors down from where the manifests get filed. That's the guy who could walk into any workstation at the port and sign in as anybody, because he's got authority everywhere." "Prove it," Whitlock said, "before he moves anyone else." They spent 48 hours proving it. They pulled Ainsworth's phone records, his email metadata, the badge scans that showed him in the Port Authority building at 3 in the morning on the night container 418 had been offloaded. They pulled his bank records, and they found the shell companies, and the shell companies owned the trucking firm, and the trucking firm owned the paperwork, and the paperwork led back to the 11 containers, and the 11 containers led back to 23 women and 2 children in the freezing dark, and the whole chain of it led back to Douglas Ainsworth's expensive shoes, stepping out of an expensive car at an expensive gala, smiling for an expensive camera. They did not arrest him yet. Whitlock wanted the basement first. She wanted to know if there was anyone still down there. On the second night, Marcus was at his apartment when his phone rang. It was 11:10. Piper was already asleep on her bed by the couch. The rain had started again, softer this time, tapping the window. It was Whitlock. "Marcus," she said, "I need you and Piper. We are moving on the hotel in 90 minutes. I want the best human-scent dog in the state on that basement door. That is your dog. I'll be there. There's more." "What?" Ainsworth knows something is happening. His phone activity spiked 20 minutes ago. He made a call to a number we can't yet trace, and then he left his house in his own car. We think he's going to the hotel. Marcus was already pulling his jacket on. Piper was already up, watching him with her ears forward, understanding without being told that they were going somewhere serious. "Rachel is with me," Whitlock said. "We'll meet you at the staging point off Route 50. They rolled onto the property in 3 unmarked vehicles at midnight, engines killed at the tree line, no lights. The hotel looked exactly like a bankrupt hotel looks, tall and dark against the sky, weeds coming up through cracks in the front walk, a spray-painted no trespassing sign on the door. The basement entrance was on the side, down a short flight of concrete steps. Marcus and Piper went first, with Whitlock right behind him and Rachel behind her and 2 SWAT operators behind them. Piper hit on the door before Marcus even got to the bottom step. She sat, then rose, then sat again, and this time she did bark, once, sharp and loud, and Whitlock nodded and the lead operator broke the door. The basement was long and low, and smelled like mold, and something worse. It was mostly empty in the front room. There were construction supplies against one wall, and a folding table, and a stack of tarps, but at the back, behind a plywood partition, was a second room, and in the second room, chained by the ankle to a pipe that ran along the wall, were 4 more women. And in the corner, huddled against a woman who was holding her tightly, was a woman with dark hair pulled back and a soft, tired face. And Marcus recognized her before Whitlock even brought the light up. She was the woman in the locket. She was Mia's mother. She lifted her head. She saw Piper first because Piper was in front. She saw the uniform second. Her mouth opened, but she did not have the strength to make a sound. Then she saw Marcus, and something in her face did what mothers' faces do when the impossible finally happens, and she reached out one shaking hand. "Mia," she whispered. Just that. Just her daughter's name. Like a prayer she had been saying for months. Marcus went to her. Rachel got the bolt cutters. The women were taken out one by one into ambulances waiting up on the road, and Mia's mother, whose name turned out to be Sophia, would not let go of Marcus's sleeve the entire way up the concrete steps and into the cold air and the light. She kept saying her daughter's name. She kept trying to ask. "She's safe," Marcus said. He said it over and over. "She's safe, Sophia. She's safe. I'm going to take you to her." Douglas Ainsworth was arrested at 3 in the morning in the parking lot of a gas station 40 miles south of the hotel. He had been on his way to a private airfield with a suitcase in his trunk containing $180,000 in cash and a fake passport made out under a name he had used, they later discovered, for 8 years. He did not resist. He asked very calmly to speak to his attorney. He was not the kind of man who broke down. He was the kind of man who thought he was better than his mistake, and even in the back of the car, with the handcuffs on, he was already planning his defense. The story broke that afternoon. It got the front page of every paper in the state. Ainsworth's face was everywhere. The photograph the papers used most often was one from the charity gala the previous spring, in his tuxedo, smiling next to the governor. The governor's office released a statement saying they were sickened and shocked. The Port Authority suspended Ainsworth's appointment immediately. His attorney gave a short statement saying his client was innocent and would be vindicated. Marcus did not read any of it. He drove to the shelter. Piper rode in the back. Sophia rode in the passenger seat, wrapped in a blanket with a styrofoam cup of hot tea in her hands that she was too shaky to drink. She had not said more than 5 words the entire drive, but as they pulled into the shelter's parking lot, she looked at Marcus, and she said in careful English, "Thank you." He shook his head. He could not think of anything to say to that. He just got out and opened her door and helped her stand. Angela Foster was waiting on the front step. She had already been called. She had already prepared Mia. In the gentle, careful way she prepared Mia for everything. But you cannot really prepare a 7-year-old girl for the moment she sees her mother alive, after she has stopped believing her mother is alive. Mia came out of the front door of the shelter walking, and she froze on the top step, and she looked at Sophia across the parking lot, and Sophia looked at her, and then Mia ran. She ran so fast she stumbled, and Sophia dropped the blanket and the cup and went to her knees on the wet asphalt, and Mia crashed into her arms, and neither of them said anything for a very long time. They just held on. Piper walked slowly across the parking lot, ears forward, tail low, and she lay down next to both of them, and she stayed there. Marcus stood by the truck. Rachel stood next to him. Neither of them said a word for what felt like an hour. Then Rachel wiped her nose with the back of her wrist and said, "Okay, we got the mother back. We're not done." They were not done. Because Ainsworth was one man, and there were, as it turned out, 4 states worth of the network still to unravel. Over the next 3 months, federal agents in Maryland, Virginia, Delaware, and New Jersey rolled up piece after piece of the operation. There were arrests of 2 truck drivers, a warehouse manager, an accountant, a woman who ran a supposed employment agency out of a strip mall in Wilmington, and 3 men whose job had been to move the victims from way stations like the basement of the bankrupt hotel to the places they were meant to end up. Every one of those arrests brought more names. Every one of those names brought more warrants. Whitlock ran on coffee and adrenaline and the kind of grim satisfaction that only comes to people who have watched something go on for years and finally have their hands on it. Marcus was in and out of interviews with the FBI, testifying to grand juries, sitting for depositions. He was reassigned temporarily to a task force, which meant he did not have to walk the container yard for a while, and which also meant he did not sleep in his own bed for weeks at a time. Piper went where he went. Piper always went where he went. She waited outside courtrooms with a handler she trusted. She napped under his desk during interviews. She did not do any more container sweeps during that time, and Marcus was, though he would not have said so, glad of it. He was not sure Piper could handle finding another one. He was not sure he could either. But not everything about those months was clean, and not everything about them was easy. 2 weeks after Ainsworth's arrest, Marcus came home late one night to find his apartment door slightly ajar. He froze in the hallway. He drew his sidearm. Piper stood behind him, absolutely still, hackles up. He pushed the door open. The lights were off. Nothing seemed disturbed. His couch was where he had left it. His dishes were where he had left them. His laptop, which he had left on the kitchen counter, was gone. He called it in. 2 officers came, took a report, dusted for prints. They found nothing. There were no signs of forced entry. Somebody had picked the lock, taken the laptop, and left. Marcus sat on his couch afterward and stared at the wall for a long time. Piper lay across his feet. He called Whitlock in the morning. She was quiet for a moment. "Was anything sensitive on that laptop?" she asked. "My personal notes from the case, nothing classified, but my address book, photos, not much, but enough to know who I care about." "Where's Mia?" "At the shelter, with her mom. Sophia doesn't have a full ID yet. Neither of them does. As of right now, they're not in any public record I can find. Let's keep it that way for a while longer." "You think somebody in Ainsworth's network is still out there?" "I think Ainsworth wasn't at the top." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "Say that again." "I think Ainsworth wasn't at the top, Marcus. He had the position, he had the access, and he had the greed. But the way this network was structured, the way the money moved, the way the shell companies were layered, that was not the work of one middle-aged bureaucrat with a boat and an ego. Somebody smarter than Ainsworth put this together, and somebody smarter than Ainsworth is watching what happens next." Marcus felt Piper lean against his leg. "What do you need me to do?" he said. "Keep Piper close. Move Mia and Sophia to the safe house on the peninsula tomorrow, and if your dog whines at anything at all, you call me before you do anything else." He moved them the next day. The safe house was a small, tidy bungalow on a wooded lot, chosen because it had good sight lines and one road in. Sophia loved it because it had windows that opened, which was, as she quietly explained to Angela, the thing she had missed most for the year and a half she had been held. Mia loved it because there was a swing set in the back, and because Piper was there almost every afternoon. The intimidation, if that was what it had been, went quiet after the break-in. For a few weeks, nothing happened. Marcus started to relax a little. He started to sleep a little more. He began to think that maybe Whitlock had been wrong, that maybe Ainsworth had been the top, that maybe the rest of the network was just muscle and infrastructure and would come apart the way networks come apart when you cut off the head. And then, on a Tuesday evening in early spring, Piper alerted on something in his own backyard. Marcus had come home late. He had let Piper out into the small fenced yard behind his apartment building to relieve herself before bed. She had gone out, and then she had come back to the door within 30 seconds, and she had not gone to the grass. She had gone to a corner near the back gate, and she had sat, and she had stared. Marcus flipped on the porch light. There, on the wet grass by the gate, was a piece of raw hamburger big as a fist, sitting where somebody had tossed it over the low fence. Marcus felt every hair on his neck stand up. Piper had not touched it. She had smelled it and sat down and stared at it and waited for him. He grabbed her collar, brought her inside, closed and locked the back door, and called the emergency vet's non-emergency line, and then Whitlock. The vet said, "Bring the meat in tomorrow morning in a sealed container." Whitlock said, "Do not touch anything and stay inside." The lab report came back 3 days later. The hamburger had been laced with enough antifreeze to kill a much larger animal, mixed with a common household poison that would have made the death look like an accident. Marcus read the report in Whitlock's office. He put it down. He did not trust himself to speak for a minute. "They tried to take my dog," he finally said. "They tried to send a message," Whitlock said. "And they picked the wrong dog to send it with." Piper, who was lying under Whitlock's desk, chewing on a rawhide, did not know anything about it. She had done what she was trained to do. She had refused a food she had not been offered by her handler. She had trusted Marcus more than her own hunger. That was all. But Marcus, driving home that afternoon with Piper in the back and his hands too tight on the wheel, understood that the whole shape of what he was doing had changed. This was not just a case anymore. He was in it now, and so was his dog, and so was a little girl at a safe house on the peninsula. He called Rachel that night. He asked her to come over. When she came, she brought Chinese food and a bottle of wine, and they sat on his couch and ate straight out of the cartons, while Piper watched them with the particular alertness that dogs reserve for takeout food. "I want to catch him," Marcus said, "whoever he is. I know you do. I want to catch him before he sends anybody another message. I know, Marcus. Let Whitlock do her job. She's good. She's the best I've ever worked with. I know she is. So I'm still going to catch him." Rachel looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "Then don't do it alone." He did not do it alone. What he did over the next 6 weeks was work every angle Whitlock would allow him to work, and he did it with a partner. Not Piper this time, Rachel. She had cleared her caseload to shadow the Ainsworth investigation because she said she owed it to the 25 people she had helped pull out of container 418, and because, though she did not say this second part, she had lived through her own version of feeling small when something big was moving underneath the world, and she wanted to be part of stopping this one. They went through the customs data again, then a third time. They went through the shipping schedules of every feeder line that touched the port of Baltimore going back 5 years. They looked for the pattern under the pattern, the movement under the movement. Tobias Reed helped them. So did Danny, who had by then become something like a 5th member of the task force, because he could not stop wanting to catch the person who had used his name. And in the 6th week, they found it. There was a shell company registered in the state of Delaware called Mercer Continental Holdings. Mercer Continental Holdings owned, through 2 layers, the trucking firm that had been scheduled to move container 418. It also owned, through 3 different layers, the bankrupt hotel on the Eastern Shore. It also, and this was the piece that changed everything, held a 15% stake in a private equity fund that had, in the last 4 years, invested in shipping infrastructure projects at 3 different East Coast ports, including a proposed expansion of a terminal at the Port of Baltimore that was currently before the state legislature. The chairman of the private equity fund was a man named Preston Whitfield. He was a 44-year-old Naval Academy graduate. He was married with 2 children. He lived in a large house in a wealthy suburb outside Annapolis. He served on the boards of a hospital and an art museum, and he had, according to public records, no involvement whatsoever in the shipping industry beyond what was publicly disclosed. But when Tobias Reed pulled the private phone records of Douglas Ainsworth going back 3 years, he found a burner phone number that Ainsworth had called 47 times, most of them on the same nights that containers had been offloaded. The burner had been purchased at a big box store in Alexandria, Virginia, and paid for in cash. The security footage from that store had long since been overwritten. But the checkout time was 7:23 in the evening on a Thursday in October, 3 years ago, and Tobias Reed cross-referenced Preston Whitfield's credit card charges from the same evening, and he found a receipt from a gas station 6 miles from the big box store, paid for at 7:41 that same evening. "That's not proof," Whitlock said when Tobias brought it to her. "But it's a thread." She pulled every thread. She had her team follow Whitfield for 3 weeks without him knowing. She got a wiretap on his home line, which he almost never used. She got warrants for his email metadata, which was scrubbed and careful, but not careful enough. She found deposits in his mother-in-law's account that could not be explained by anything in his tax returns. She found a pattern of overseas travel that lined up too closely with the movement of certain containers to be coincidence. Piece by piece, over the course of 2 months, she built a case. It was not a case that would put him away for the rest of his life, not by itself. But it was a case that would let her arrest him, and questioning him with the right leverage was a different game entirely. Whitlock decided to make the arrest at a public event. She said later that she thought a lot about that decision, and that she was not proud of the part of herself that had liked the symmetry of it, but that operationally it made sense. Whitfield was scheduled to attend a fundraising gala at a hotel in downtown Baltimore on the last Saturday in April for a non-profit that worked with, of all things, refugee families. The event was black tie. The governor would be there. The mayor would be there. And because the FBI had made a point of leaking a small, carefully chosen story to a reporter earlier in the week, the press would be there in numbers. Marcus was there too. So was Piper. They were not there to make the arrest. They were there because Whitlock had asked quietly whether Marcus would be willing to be present for it, and Marcus had said yes without hesitation. He was in his dress uniform. Piper was in her working vest. They stood together in the lobby of the hotel, near the coat check, out of the way. Rachel was at the entrance. Tobias was in a service corridor near the ballroom. Whitlock was upstairs, waiting for the right moment. Preston Whitfield walked in at 7:10 in the evening, on the arm of his wife, in a tuxedo that had almost certainly cost more than Marcus's car. He smiled at the maitre d'. He waved to a state senator across the lobby. He was walking toward the coat check when Piper stiffened at Marcus's side and made the smallest sound in her throat. Marcus looked down at her. Piper was staring at Preston Whitfield with the exact same intensity, the exact same trembling still focus that she had shown in front of container 418 almost 5 months earlier. She had never seen this man before. She had never smelled his clothes. She had no reason, any human being would have told you, to react to him at all. But she did, And Marcus, who had spent the last 5 months learning that his dog knew things that no human could name, did not doubt her for 1 second. He keyed his radio. "He's in the lobby," he said quietly, "and Piper's on him." Whitlock came down the main staircase 2 minutes later, flanked by Rachel and by 2 men in FBI windbreakers, and she walked across the marble floor toward Preston Whitfield with the calm, unhurried steps of someone who had practiced this moment in her head for a long time. Whitfield saw her. He must have known, in the second before she reached him, exactly what was happening. But his face did not change. He turned toward her with a polite, questioning smile, and he said something Marcus could not hear, and Whitlock said something back, and then Whitlock produced the warrant, and then Whitfield's smile went away for the first time. He looked past Whitlock. He saw Marcus. He saw Piper. For a long second, the 2 men just looked at each other. Then Whitfield turned back to Whitlock, and he said, in a voice that was still perfectly polite, "I believe there has been some sort of mistake." "There has been," Whitlock said, "for about 3 years. We're fixing it now." They took him out through the front doors. The cameras were already there. The flashes were already popping. His wife stood in the middle of the lobby with her hand over her mouth. The senator across the room was already dialing his phone. The reporter Whitlock had leaked to earlier in the week was already writing the lead paragraph in her head. Piper watched Whitfield walk out the door in handcuffs, and only then did she relax her shoulders, and only then did she look up at Marcus for the release word. "Good girl," he said very quietly. "Good girl, Pipes." She wagged her tail once. Then she leaned against his leg. Marcus thought, standing there in the marble lobby with his dog against his leg and the last of the flashbulbs still going off through the front glass, that he was done. He thought the case was over. He thought that whatever damage he could do to the network had been done, and that whatever justice could be delivered was on its way. He was wrong about that. There was one more night to come. Preston Whitfield was arraigned the following Monday. His attorneys were expensive and thorough. They got him out on bond, an enormous bond, with a monitoring bracelet and a passport surrender and a list of restrictions the size of a phone book. His trial was set for the fall. He went home to his large house in the suburb outside Annapolis, and he was, everyone assumed, going to spend the next 6 months quietly building his defense with his lawyers and staying very much out of the news. He did not do that. What he did instead, on a warm Wednesday night in early May, 10 days after his arraignment, was cut the ankle monitor off with a pair of medical shears at 8:42 in the evening, walk out the side door of his own house, get into a car that was waiting for him in the alley behind the neighbor's hedge, and disappear. The alert went out to every agency in the region within 20 minutes. The FBI locked down the airports. The state police set up checkpoints on the highways. Whitlock called Marcus on his personal phone at 9:09. "Marcus," she said. Her voice was tight. "Where are Mia and Sophia?" "At the safe house." "Get to the safe house now. Do not wait for backup. I have units en route, but you're closer. Go." He went. He grabbed Piper on the way to the truck. He did not put her in the back. He put her in the front seat next to him, and she rode with her ears forward and her body absolutely still, understanding without a word that this was the kind of drive where she needed to be ready. He took the causeway too fast. He took the county road too fast. He turned onto the wooded drive that led to the safe house too fast, and he killed his headlights 300 yards out because something in his gut told him to. The bungalow was dark. That was the first thing. It should not have been dark. At 9:30 on a Wednesday night, Sophia would have had the kitchen light on, and Mia would have had her bedroom lamp on, because she still slept with a lamp on, because she was 7 years old, and she had spent 11 days in a container in the dark. The bungalow was dark. Marcus pulled the truck up quietly behind the marshal's cruiser at the end of the driveway. The cruiser was parked where it should have been parked, but the driver's side window was down, and the marshal in the front seat was slumped forward against the wheel, and Marcus saw, even from 20 feet away, that the marshal was not moving. Marcus drew his sidearm. Piper was out of the truck the instant he opened the door, silent as smoke, on his flank the way she had been trained to be. He crossed to the cruiser. The marshal, a woman in her 30s named Deputy Hayes, was slumped forward, unconscious, breathing but not by much. There was a bright red mark on the side of her neck. Somebody had come up alongside the car and put her down fast, with something chemical. Marcus keyed his radio, whispered his location, said the words, "Officer down," and requested EMS. He did not wait for the acknowledgement. He and Piper moved on the house. The front door was locked. That was correct. He went around the side, quiet on the pine needles, keeping low. The kitchen window was open. That was not correct. Sophia liked windows open, but not at night. Not this window, not this one that faced the driveway. Someone had opened it. He heard nothing inside. He heard the wind in the trees. He heard very faintly the sound of a car engine idling somewhere farther down the road. He signaled Piper to hold. He went in through the back door, which he opened with his own key without a sound. The kitchen was empty. The living room was empty. The hallway was empty. Then he heard, from the direction of Mia's bedroom, a small, sharp intake of breath cut off, a child's breath being covered. He moved down the hall on the balls of his feet. Piper was behind him now, at his heel, because he had signaled her to follow, and she was silent as a shadow. He came to Mia's door. It was ajar. Through the gap he could see, in the faint blue light of the nightlight on the wall, a figure standing over Mia's bed. It was a man in dark clothes. He had one hand across Mia's mouth. Sophia was on the floor, tied at the wrists, gagged, conscious, eyes wide and full of a mother's terror. The man in dark clothes had a syringe in his other hand. He was, in the next second, going to use it on Mia. Marcus did not have time to think about the shot. There were too many angles wrong, too much risk of hitting the child. He did the only thing he could do, which was to release Piper and open the door in the same motion, and he said one word, low and hard. Take. Piper had been trained on that word for 4 years. She had, in 100 training scenarios, hit a padded sleeve on a moving target from a running start in less than 2 seconds. What she did that night, in the small blue-lit bedroom of a bungalow on the eastern shore of Maryland, was the fastest and cleanest work of her life. She crossed the room in one leap. She hit the man high on the arm that held the syringe, and the syringe went flying across the room and shattered against the far wall, and the man went down hard on his back, and Piper had her jaws on the sleeve of his other arm before he could reach for anything else. She did not tear. She held. She held the way she had been trained to hold, and she growled from somewhere deep in her chest, and she waited. Marcus was across the room a half-second behind her. He had his gun on the man's face. He said, "Do not move." The man did not move. Marcus got the cuffs on him one-handed, with his knee in the man's chest, and he did not let Piper release the sleeve until the man's second arm was secured behind his back. Only then did he say, "Us," and Piper let go and stepped back and stayed in place, watching. Marcus turned to Mia. She was sitting up in the bed with her eyes as wide as saucers. She was shaking, but she was not hurt. He got Sophia's gag out first, and Sophia gasped, and then he had the wrist ties off, and Sophia crawled across the floor on her knees and pulled her daughter into her arms and rocked her, and she was crying, and Mia was crying, and Marcus, holding his sidearm on a man on the floor of a child's bedroom, while his dogs stood watch and a mother and a daughter held each other on a rag rug in the pale blue light of a nightlight, thought that whatever else he did with his life, he had done at least one thing right. The man on the floor turned out to be a private security contractor named Elias Kroll, ex-military, ex-a lot of things, with a record in 3 countries. Whitfield had apparently kept him on retainer through one of the shell companies for years. Kroll had been the man who put the hamburger over Marcus's fence. He had been the man who broke into Marcus's apartment. He had been the man who had made most of the physical arrangements for the network's stateside operations. And on this particular night, He had been the man Whitfield had sent to make sure his most dangerous witness, a 7-year-old girl who had seen his face at the hotel where she and her mother had been held, was never able to identify him in court. He was, when he was formally interrogated over the next several weeks, the man who broke. He gave up Whitfield. He gave up the pilot who had been waiting to fly Whitfield out of a small airstrip in southern Delaware that same night. He gave up 2 accomplices in New Jersey who had not yet been on the FBI's radar. He gave up bank accounts, safe deposit boxes, and a storage locker in Baltimore that turned out to contain records going back 6 years. Preston Whitfield was picked up before dawn at that airstrip, sitting in a car with his passport and his laptop and a bag of cash and a look on his face, according to the agent who put the cuffs on him, of a man who had never really believed until that moment that any of this could actually happen to him. The trial did not happen for another 8 months. When it did, it was one of the biggest federal trials the state had seen in a decade. Marcus testified. Rachel testified. Danny testified. Sophia testified in a closed session with a translator and with Angela Foster sitting in the row behind her. And she said what had been done to her, quietly and completely, and the jury did not need very long after that to convict Whitfield on almost every count. He got life without parole. Ainsworth got 40 years. Elias Kroll got 30 in exchange for his cooperation. 14 other defendants across 4 states pleaded to sentences ranging from 5 to 25 years. Every single one of the 23 women who had come out of Container 418 was placed in a program that gave them a path to legal residency and to jobs and to therapy. And while some of them chose to return home once they could travel safely, most of them stayed. Kai, the little boy, was reunited with an aunt in Atlanta. The little girl with the locket stayed with her mother in a small green house in a quiet neighborhood outside Annapolis, on a street where the mailman knew everyone by name. Marcus made the arrangements for the house himself. Angela Foster helped. So did the department, which had, on the recommendation of a very grateful Sergeant Rachel Bishop, cut through more red tape in a month than it had cut through in the previous decade. Sophia got a job at a bakery 3 blocks from the house because she had baked in her old life and because the woman who owned the bakery had read the newspaper and wanted to help. Mia enrolled in the local elementary school in the fall. She was in 1st grade. She was quiet, but she was learning fast, and she made a friend the first week, a red-haired girl named Ellie who lived 2 doors down and who did not ask a single question about where Mia had come from. Marcus retired Piper the following spring. She had done, in her 4 working years, more than most canine dogs did in twice that time, and she deserved a soft bed and long afternoons. He did not keep her himself. He kept a photograph of her on his desk at work, and he kept the memory of her walking into that container, and he kept the sound of her whining in the rain in front of Container 418. But he did not keep her. He gave her to Mia. He talked it through with Sophia first, in her kitchen in the little greenhouse, with the smell of bread baking and the sound of Mia laughing in the backyard with Ellie. Sophia listened, and she cried, and she said yes. Then Marcus went out into the backyard, where Piper was already sniffing along the fence line, the way she sniffed along everything, and he called her over. Mia came too. Marcus knelt down in the grass. Piper sat in front of him, ears forward, tail wagging slowly, the way she had sat in front of him 1,000 times. "Pipes," Marcus said. He had to stop and clear his throat. "You did good. You did really good. And you know what dogs get when they do good." Piper cocked her head. "They get a home," Marcus said. "They get to sleep in. They get to be someone's dog. Not a partner, just a dog. You've earned that, sweetheart. You've earned it more than any dog I've ever known." He looked up at Mia. Mia was standing very still with her hand on the top of Piper's head. "Mia," Marcus said, "you want a dog?" Mia's eyes filled up. She nodded. She could not speak. "Then she's yours. She's your dog now. Okay? She's going to sleep in your room. She's going to eat her breakfast in your kitchen. She's going to walk to school with you in the mornings. If your mama says it's okay, you take care of her and she'll take care of you. That's how it works. Mia went down on her knees and wrapped her arms around Piper's neck. Piper, who had lain still on freezing steel and who had taken a man down in a bedroom and who had refused a poisoned piece of meat, and who had whined at a container door in a way no one had ever heard from a working dog before, closed her eyes and pressed her head into the child's shoulder and made a low, contented sound that Marcus had never heard from her either. He drove home that evening in a truck that felt, for the first time in almost 5 years, empty. He did not turn on the radio. He rolled the window down and let the spring air come in. He thought about the shift he had walked so many years ago, the shift where a puppy named Piper had come home with him for the first time and had chewed his kitchen table leg while he was asleep. He thought about how it was possible for a life to be built out of very small choices, and how sometimes those choices came together into something bigger than any of the people who had made them. Years passed. Mia grew up. She got taller. She got braver. She started sleeping without a light on when she was 10. She joined the school choir when she was 11. She got braces when she was 12, and she hated them for exactly 3 weeks before she forgot she had them. Sophia became the assistant manager at the bakery, and then eventually a partner. They kept the little greenhouse. They painted the shutters blue. They planted tomatoes in the yard every spring. Ellie remained Mia's best friend. Marcus came for dinner one Sunday a month without fail, and later, when he had a wife and a daughter of his own, they came too, and Sunday dinners became crowded and loud and full of the ordinary happiness that is the whole point of everything. Piper lived to be almost 14. She slept in Mia's room every night of her life after that spring afternoon. She met Mia at the school gate every afternoon for the years Mia was young enough to want to be met. She rode in the back seat of Sophia's car with her head out the window and her ears flapping. She learned on her own to open the pantry door where the dog food was kept and to sit very politely next to the bin until someone came to pour her a scoop. She never worked another shift a day in her life. She got fat in a good way, the way retired working dogs are allowed to get. She was, by every measure Marcus knew, happy. She died on a Sunday morning in October, quietly in Mia's bed, with Mia's hand on her side. She'd been slowing down for a few weeks. The night before, she had eaten her dinner and gone to sleep, and in the morning she did not wake up. Mia, who was 15 years old by then and taller than her mother, called Marcus before she called anyone else. He came right over. He sat on the edge of Mia's bed and put his hand on Piper's head and thanked her, in a whisper that was more for himself than for her, for the shift she had worked in the rain in front of container 418, and for the sound she had made that morning, and for everything that had come from it. Then he helped Mia bury her under the tomato plants in the backyard of the little greenhouse, in a wooden box that Sophia had lined with an old blanket. Standing there afterward, with his hand on Mia's shoulder and the October wind in the trees, Marcus thought about Piper walking down the length of that container and lying down beside a child. And he thought about the strange, quiet way in which a life is sometimes given a shape by a single moment that nobody sees coming. He thought about the 7-year-old girl who had reached out one thin hand in the freezing dark. He thought about the 15-year-old girl standing next to him now, tall and steady and safe. He thought about all the ordinary Sunday mornings between the two of them, and about how those were, in the end, the whole point. Years later, when Mia was in her 20s and finishing up a degree in social work at a university not far from the little greenhouse, she would go back to the port of Baltimore one grey November morning with Marcus at her own request. They stood together on the wet asphalt in the container yard, in the same row 17, in front of the same rust-red container that had been repainted and returned to service and had crossed the Pacific many times since. The rain was falling exactly the way it had fallen on the morning Piper had stopped in front of it. drumming on the steel, streaking the ribbed sides, beading on the seams. Marcus put his hand on the door. "You okay?" he asked. Mia nodded. She reached out and put her own hand next to his. "Thank you," she said. Not to him, not exactly. To the door maybe, to the dog who was not there anymore. To the whole long chain of small things that had led her from the inside of that container to the outside of it, from the freezing dark to the ordinary daylight, from a name whispered under a stranger's breath to a life she got to build for herself. Marcus wrapped his arm around her shoulders. Mia leaned her head against him, and the rain kept falling on the docks, the way it always would, on a place where every container held a story and where sometimes, if you were very lucky, and if a dog you did not deserve told you to stop, you got to be the one who opened the door. If this story moved you, take a second right now to like the video. Tell me in the comments what part of it stayed with you the most, and subscribe so the next story comes straight to you. Share it with someone who believes, the way Marcus and Piper believed, that ordinary people and ordinary dogs can still change the world.